welcome back. I'm Miruna and I'm here with Andrea as usual. And today's interview is with Keith Wolfe, Property and Casualty President at Swiss Re. Thank you, Keith, for taking the time to share your story with us. It's much appreciated.
Delighted to be here.
So I have noticed that your career path is quite unique in the sense that you're not working as a fire protection engineer for a company that does this, even though you did your bachelor's in fire protection. And I find this quite interesting because it shows that a fire engineering degree can open up lots of doors for you, and it doesn't mean that you have to do one thing all your life. However, before getting into that, I would like to start afresh and ask you, why did you choose to follow the FB program at Maryland out of many other programs? Because in my vision, you could have chosen something like fire risk management, for example.
Yeah, so I had personal close ties to the program before I had actually joined it, as well as the fire protection industry. So I was a bit unique in that I had a family affiliation with the industry before I joined it. So probably not the broadest reason to join, but it was a very interesting track, I thought. And the the promise of a job with a degree, no matter what you do with it, you're going to always find an opportunity for employment. They had a 100% job placement rate, was also a pretty appealing statement. It's been true to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And so throughout your career, you've gained a lot of experience outside of the fire engineering field. So you started your career as a loss prevention consultant and you worked your way up to the top, and now you're the US PNC president at Swiss Re, which is one of the biggest reinsurance companies in the world. So I'd like to find out how the whole journey was from a consultant to top management. So how this degree helped you in your career?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important part here is for people to recognize that I don't think it's a natural matching that most people make between fire protection engineering and the insurance or reinsurance industry. It's not an often talked about path to be able to use the education. And it's one of those that I honestly tripped across almost accidentally when I was leaving my bachelor's program. When I started doing some research after I found a connection into the industry, I realized that the education that I had received was very applicable to some pretty cool jobs in the insurance space. And that loss prevention consulting role that you mentioned was still probably one of the best jobs I've ever had in my career. I spent a few years basically touring raw materials to finished goods at heavy manufacturing operations, helping them assess what the fire protection systems were capable of and whether they were maintained properly. And then we also learned a ton about other types of property risks as part of this property insurance organization. So how do you protect buildings from wind, earthquake, other perils that might actually be something that would interrupt that business operation? It was fascinating. I mean, to see how industry worked in manufacturing from literally raw materials to finished goods at 23, it was super.
As you mentioned, this is quite a unique path, I have to admit. And also, I want to find out why you didn't go into normal consulting. What attracted you to this domain, reinsurance and loss prevention?
So my personal journey, honestly, when I was in school, I was very interested in being an arson investigator for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms here in the United States. And that path, unfortunately, just didn't unfold the way I would have wanted it to, and it didn't come true. But at the time, many of the people that were graduating the program would go into kind of one of three areas. They were either into consulting, private consulting firms, as you mentioned. They go into the government, which is essentially consulting for them in some form or fashion in the military or the private sector government stuff. And then the other one was utilities. That was a monstrous piece of the industry back then. In the mid 90s. So, I didn't find any of those particularly compelling, knowing what my path was hopefully going to be with the ATF. And because it didn't work out, I started exploring other opportunities. I actually ended up wandering around for almost 6 months, searching for different places to apply this degree. And then I found the insurance industry.
I presume even though you make it sound easy and you are talking about it with passion, it's not an easy field to work in. And yeah, we're talking about prevention and human life safety after all. So I am thinking, what are some of the biggest challenges you've had to face in this position?
Oh, wow. Okay. So there's a lot of travel, right? So balance, honestly, with your life is some people's big concerns. When you're in your 20s, I think it's a little bit easier to embrace the idea of doing an awful lot for the employer or the profession you've chosen at the time and investing a lot of effort there. As people get a bit older, obviously there's more balance with a marriage, a family, children, et cetera, that come in. Um, so I think that's probably, to be honest, over my entire career, been the biggest thing I'd struggled with is how to get that balance at home, because there was a lot of travel involved. Most of the roles I've had have been requiring me to be either out at client sites or out with clients throughout my 25 years, and that's pretty difficult to manage if you don't spend a lot of time thinking about it proactively.
Indeed, and definitely it's an interesting domain, and I'm curious to find out more about what this career implies. We know that the fire engineering consultant is dealing with local authorities, architects, and so on. And if in case of a fire, the the building is already prepared by the fire engineering consultants for the firefighters to get in and out safely, and somehow every fire field is connected to another. So I want to know how an insurance company is linked to the fire engineering domain.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So, a lot of our effort is put into the mitigation component or prevention if possible. But, most of fire protection is around prevention and mitigation. So we don't tie in much differently. So as an example, in that loss control role that we talked about a little bit earlier, I was actually trying to go out there and do a very similar job to what private consultants might do when they're doing systems inspections and testing. Now, I wasn't doing the testing. Some of those people that were showing up to do the testing were actually consultants. I would witness this on behalf of the insurance company and then make sure that that information, with all the technical knowledge I had, was translated and fed properly back into the underwriting process for the insurance organizations. So ideally, in most of the cases, we're actually helping improve the efficiency of the insurance system, because we're actually feeding really important data that goes back into the insurance underwriting process. Now, the other piece of this is claims. Actually, as a field rep in most property insurance organizations, you actually end up handling losses as well. So I was out in the field, not adjusting the losses, but actually collecting all of the information after a loss occurred. So I saw some pretty spectacular things at manufacturing facilities after an incident had occurred. And that could have been an explosion, a fire, a hurricane had come through and ripped a roof off a building. So it expanded beyond fire protection, to be honest, which was one of the things that really appealed to me. Is, okay, I'm going to learn how to apply my degree in a very different way, but I'm also going to learn and expand my mind about a bunch of other stuff I didn't pick up in school per se, but also is still related to the field.
And do you also train fire engineers? Because I come across an insurance company that is doing that.
Yeah, so in my own experience, I showed up for a 2-week training class when I was 23 and first joined that organization where I started. And almost every day we had different training that was mostly related to fire protection. I realized that I'd had semester classes on some of these things we were spending one day on. So it was a relatively easy training course for me coming in, but it made me, it really did reinforce for me that it was the right choice, because there was a ton of knowledge and experience I had that was very applicable in this space. And they were trying to get people this experience in a very condensed format very quickly to get them out in these jobs.
I feel like the reinsurance domain can be quite attractive, and if you have a degree in fire protection engineering, can be even more interesting, as you already have a comprehensive view of the fire protection and human life safety domain. And even you can understand better the technical aspects of the job, as you mentioned earlier. So I'm curious, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, where else would you think you'd be working?
Oh, that's a great question. My own personal journey has always been to take what I've learned and try and apply it in a different way. I mean, a little bit of that theme, even in the beginning of the last question. I wanted to pick up what I'd learned in school and try to add on to that and apply it in a different way, even to join the insurance industry. I look for those opportunities all the time. So I think mostly what I would encourage people to think about is, how do you expand your own knowledge, but also apply what you've learned over time to grow yourself, right? It's challenging about growing yourself that everybody should look for. And that opportunity exists in a lot of places people don't necessarily think about all the time. And I think, this example of trying to apply fire protection engineering in the insurance space is probably one of those.
that you shared some insights with us from a professional point of view. To be honest, I do not have much contact with this field, but I hear people from time to time talking about insurance or reinsurance. And since we have you here, I'd like to find out what future you see for the job market in this career, and if you can make some predictions of what trends you see developing over the next years.
Yeah, so, to your point about the buildings will always be built. They'll always need to be maintained. Manufacturing is not a whole lot different. There will always be some element of physical presence out there that needs physical protection. So I don't see the field shrinking. If I think about what's going on in our industry more broadly, data and data science is an extremely important part of what we're doing now, and it wasn't really at all 10 years ago. So the understanding of how you take, engineers who are, relatively good with math, understand computing models, and then take that knowledge and widen that lens a bit beyond perhaps the application they learned that knowledge for in the first place. That's one area where I would see an expansion potentially coming. I think often I find, this is a pretty broad statement, but engineers will very often narrow their field of vision and they apply what they've learned very, very deeply in a space, which is needed and great, but there are other opportunities to widen that lens. It's just a very different path. It's not right or wrong. We need both, but the reality is we need both, and there's not as many people that think more broadly about how to apply what they've learned in an engineering discipline, in other applications.
I totally agree with you, Keith. Thank you. And you guys keep that in mind. And right now, you, Keith, are in a top management position, but there is always something more waiting. So, what's the next for you in your career? CEO, maybe?
Well, that would be nice. It's not that easy, but yes, that would be nice. So I think, I have really, really enjoyed over my career the opportunity to interact with people, and whether they were clients, customers, the facilities engineers at these plants I mentioned, or the staff that works for the organization under a pretty large enterprise where we are today. That piece has really got me energized, and I've got a passion for it. So a role that obviously includes a lot of interaction with people, that's absolutely, necessary for me. And like I mentioned before, it's, how do I go do something I really haven't done and take the knowledge I've accrued and apply it so it actually is beneficial, not just for me, but for wherever I am able to land next.
And because this is a project, this project is dedicated to the younger generation of engineers and students, I have one more question for you, and that is, what piece of advice would you give to them as they are just starting their careers?
That's a fantastic question. I get this question a lot. So the one that I think people underappreciate is take the risks. Take the risks on yourself and do it early in your career. There's very little downside in it, and the downsides are a lot less than you think. We overestimate the power of risk in our own minds so often. And I'll give you an example. We are at Swiss Re a net supplier of global mobility opportunities. We are willing to move people across this globe for jobs all the time. And we struggle to find people who are willing to opt into those roles for a litany of reasons. But the point is, if you get presented an opportunity that you think is a little bit uncomfortable for you, but not catastrophic, and even if stuff goes wrong and it doesn't work out the way you think it does, you'll learn a ton. I've been in situations where things have blown up spectacularly in roles, and I learned a ton and was able to pick it up and then apply those learnings, in the next role or the next 3 roles after that. So don't take risks on yourself. That's the biggest tip I give people.
Thank you. I guess it is good to get out of your comfort zone sometimes, and yeah, take the risk. And now we have reached the end of this interview, and we can conclude that a fire engineering degree can give you a holistic view of the fire protection field. It can open your eyes to how many different things are waiting for you out there. And if you have a good degree, then the world is open to you. So thank you very much, Kit.
Thank you. This was a great conversation. I appreciate it.